Well, again, good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm joined by my colleagues who are members of the Education Committee, and we want to focus today on education funding, in particular K-through 12 funding. 3 points that we hope to make here today. One is the importance of fully funding the education formula and doing it this spring. It's important that it be done immediately so we don't have chaos with RIF notices going out and schools and parents being uncertain as to what's going to happen with the next school year. Despite our budget differences, we need to fully fund the foundation level in K through 12. Secondly, we want to express our opposition to holding all of the school children in the state hostage until there's a bailout for Chicago. That is simply unfair. And thirdly, we want to reiterate our support to begin an intensive process of reviewing the formula that we currently have in place. During the budget address last month, the governor did indicate that he was calling on full funding for the general state aid formula, and he is adding $55 million increase to the school budget in order to accomplish that. We want to continue to move forward with that legislation. And then once that critical task is completed of funding the school aid formula at 100%, we have to take on that task of reworking the formula. One of the things that the Democrats have said is that we don't want to do the school aid or do school funding until the school aid formula has been redone. We don't think that is possible because that is a long and difficult and arduous task. They have also said that they want to look at printouts so that there's no winners or losers under the school aid formula. That's an unrealistic expectation. The way the formula works now, true, we could improve it, but the fact of the matter is it's figured on many different variables, including the number of students, the local property tax wealth, the average daily attendance. So there will always be ebbs and flows in that formula, and Senator Barackman is going to elaborate on that in just a moment. The district's resources, local resources, again, is another issue that affects how much a district gets under the formula. So the concept of a resource equalizer formula is what we have, and the formula, even though it needs improvement, is working to the extent it does tend to equalize those resources based on the factors that go into the formula. Again, as I mentioned, Senator Barackman is going to elaborate a bit on how that formula works and why we may indeed see variations with various districts, and that is not the reason to hold up the funding formula. So, Senator Barackman?
Thanks, and good morning, all. I want to start with the concept of these foundation level grants, and I think we're all becoming more aware of how our current funding formula works. But it's important to recognize that the foundation level grants is a recognition by the legislature of a minimum amount of funding that is designed to be required to be sent to our schools so that all of our students across the state have a foundation level of educational support that they can receive in their school districts. This is a concept, it's embedded in statute, and it's an important concept. Senate President Cullerton has recently suggested that there may be some negative consequences to some districts. He characterized it as winners and losers that may result from fully funding this existing formula. I think his assertion is false. I think he's simply trying to generate pressure here for his preferred proposal to change the current funding formula. The reality is that in every year there are changes to the amount of the funding that the state sends to individual school districts. Some school districts get more, some get less. Under the current formula and under every proposed formula, there are many out there, under any formula, there are going to be, the Leader Redonio characterized it as ebbs and flows, situations where some districts get more or less based on the prior year. This is natural. This occurs under the current formula, and it will continue to occur under any formula proposed, any revisions that we all can agree to in Springfield. Here's what's important to recognize about the current formula. We often talk about proration and the fact that proration results in a dramatic problem for some districts, and in fact, a heightened problem for the districts that are in most need of school funding. Here's how the problem works. Let's say, for example, a school district gets $100 from the state and it is prorated at 10%. That means that school district only gets $90. Let's say another district that is more in need gets $10,000 from the state. That same 10% proration means that their funding is cut by $1,000 down to $9,000. A 10% proration or cut dramatically impacts those districts who are in most need of state funding. And what's unfortunate is that Democrats have continued to express concern over this proration, yet today they come out and speak against the easiest fix to proration, which is fully funding the formula. Unfortunately, for years we've seen this pattern persist. The Democrats, when they controlled both branches of government, the legislative branch and the executive branch, for the last 7 years, although they spoke against proration, each of their budgets knowingly funded education at a lower rate than is required by law by that foundation level, thereby prorating the amount sent to the school districts that need it the most. This is important to recognize because these same Democrats who recognize the problem exists today are unwilling to fix it in the way that is easiest to fix. Senator Lightford previously sponsored Senate Joint Resolution 44 condemning proration. Senator Minar said during his debate on SB 16, proration is probably the most devastating thing that has happened, especially when it comes to the inequality between the haves and the have-nots in the state. Senator Kotowski acknowledged during floor debate last session that low-income school districts are the ones who are most negatively impacted when the foundation level is not fully funded. Yet again, since 2007, Democrats in budget after budget did not fully fund the formula and thereby caused these damages to the school districts that needed it the most. Since FY 2009, the proration has been somewhere between 87% and 97%. Certainly, the first thing that the legislature can do, and I'm glad that Governor Rauner wants to do this, is fully fund the formula. 100% funding means that under the existing formula, the school districts who need it the most are going to get more of the money than they would see if proration continued. Now, we all agree, acknowledge, and want to see a change in the funding formula. That is a very complicated process. I've been a part of it. I'm going to continue to be a part of it. But I think we saw even just last year how difficult it is. Last year, a very controversial piece of legislation moved through the Senate. That legislation didn't even get a hearing in the House. So I think it's unfair today to hold our students hostage on a very difficult process of changing that formula, and we ought to do what we can do, which is fully fund the formula. This allows us, fully funding the formula, by the way, helps us change the funding formula because it gives us data on what fully funding the current formula does. We don't have any data like that. All the data that we've seen uses this proration type data, which doesn't give us a full picture of how the current formula can work if fully funded. I think we need to stop playing political games with our children. School districts are concerned that the legislature is going to be unable to fund their operations next year. We need to set them at ease. We need parents to be set at ease. I think fully funding the foundation level means more money to K-12, period. There's no losers in this plan. Every school district gets more money with our plan than they would if the total funding remained flat. With that, I want to turn it over to Senator McConaughey.
Thank you. You know, I think we all would agree that fully funding the foundation level is the very least we can do in terms of the commitment that we have made to all school districts across the state and to every child, that we have made a commitment to provide necessary resources for education. That's a commitment we made, and we have an obligation to live up to that. So I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And we talk about the need to look at a new formula before we move forward. We don't have that kind of time. We've got to establish what funding is going to be available so school districts can plan accordingly and ensure that they have the resources. No one up here is going to disagree that we need a new formula. We clearly do. But the current formula is complicated, and any effort to come up with a new formula that really for the first time meets the needs of all children across the state is going to be a very complex process that's going to require all types of stakeholders from all over the state to have a voice in how that works. So we all agree with that, but right now we've got to figure out how we're going to fund education going into next year. And if we're going to talk about fairness, and we're going to hold the rest of the state hostage till we get something straightened out on the poor finances of CPS, let's think and talk about the disadvantages that suburban and downstate school districts have dealt with for a very long period of time. So consider the fact that school districts, whether they've had a strong property tax base or not, all over the state have considered referendums and have passed referendums in an attempt to try to make up the difference for not getting enough money from the state. As far as I can tell, CPS hasn't had or attempted to hold a referendum to increase their own tax base in more than 80 years. Consider the fact that, as Senator Barrickman has talked about and Leader Radonio, the current formula takes a whole block of dollars and gives it to CPS, and then every other school district in the state is left to figure out how to manage the scraps. And third, but very, very important in all of this, is the property tax implication of this. We hear all the time that our communities pay some of the highest property taxes in the entire country. That's not in Cook County or in the city of Chicago, but that's in the suburbs, and that is in downstate. And consider that in the city of Chicago, in Cook County, they pay half the tax rate that we do in the suburbs. So in my district out in Kane County, a $250,000 house will pay twice the amount of property taxes that same value house pays in the city of Chicago. And within that property tax bill, anywhere from 70 to 90% of that bill is to pay for education. So what is in fact happening here is downstate and in the suburbs, we are paying the bulk of the cost of public education, while in the city of Chicago, the local taxpayers pay no more than 40% of the total cost of educating their children. We are taxing people across this state right out of their homes with the property tax, and we are losing, because of some of our policies in the past, we are losing entire economies in some of these smaller downstate districts that simply don't have the resources to make up the difference when we prorate. These are the kinds of things that we hear about in our districts every single day. And if we're going to talk about proration, we're going to talk about holding everybody hostage, let's talk about the inequities of how we fund education for the rest of the state. And I will turn it over to Senator Rezin.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Senator Rezin, 38th Senate District, and I am here as well to reiterate the importance of fully funding education. I see the impact directly in my district. When I started 6 short years ago, I actually came in during lame duck when the discussion for the income tax increase was happening on the floor. And at the time and after the subsequent income tax increase, where $30 billion in new revenue came into the state, we continued to still prorate the school districts. Who does that impact? It impacts schools such as Streeter in my district, Ottawa, LaSalle, Peru, Depew, and Plano, because they heavily rely on state funding. So when you prorate a school district that heavily relies on state funding, then they in turn have to make very difficult decisions to manage their budgets. Do they have reserves, which they don't? Then they would have to lay off teachers or look to try to pass referendums locally. That's why we're here today to say, give us a standalone bill with no poison pills on it, something that we can all agree on, which is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that we've all talked about in the previous years to simply fully fund education. If you talk to our superintendents, they will say, give us the money that we're expecting for our budget, give us some relief and unfunded mandates, and then we will do the rest. As Senator Barrickman did say, Senator McConaughey, Senator Barrickman, and I served on the EFAC committee to look at potential new funding mechanisms for education. We'll continue to work with our friends across the aisle to figure out what that is. That's a long-term solution. It's very, very difficult to change an education funding formula that has been in statute for 30 years. When we do it, when we look at it, we want to make sure that we do it right. And also, we need to have new revenue to come in when we decide to change that education funding formula. But until then, by passing a standalone bill, we're telling our school districts we're providing them stability when they're making the decisions for the upcoming school year. Thank you. Senator Rose?
Chapin Rose, 51st Senate District. I just want to say two quick things. First of all, I have stood corrected time and again by my local superintendents when I use the word proration. It is not a proration, it's a cut. Only in this Orwellian newspeak world that comes out of Chicago can you take a word like proration and have people go, oh, that must be okay. It's not okay. It is a cut. And so I've stood corrected in front of my superintendents. I'm hoping to correct the media on this. When you hear proration, it is a cut, period, plain and simple. And for the last 6 years, K-12 has been cut, period, plain and simple, by the Democratic majorities. It wasn't until Governor Rauner came in that we got an increase. Now, here's what I want to say about this. This is the chance to provide immediate impact to the schools that I represent. The governor stands for fully funding the existing formula while we take the time to do the very important work of reforming the system correctly. The last thing I'm going to say is this. To hold a kid in Sullivan, Illinois, hostage, in Paris, Illinois, hostage, in Argenta-Oriena, Illinois, hostage, to protect and defend some system that has been ruined, woefully mismanaged, and destroyed in the Chicago public school system, that, by the way, already favors the Chicago public school system to the exclusions of the kids in Sullivan, in Paris, in Argenta-Oriena, is absolutely wrong, period, plain and simple. Thank you.